Okay, so now it's time to think about situations where the government intervenes in the marketplace. And we have a couple of ways that the government might do that. Generally, they can intervene by uh, instituting a price control, either a minimum or maximum price. Minimum prices would be called price floors. Maximum prices would be called price ceilings. They can also use a quantity control, which is generally a quota. Later on, we'll talk about excise taxes, a tax on a specific good, and when we talk about some things with elasticity. But for now, let's look at a price ceiling. We know that a price ceiling is a maximum price. Now, I'm not going to get into when or why it's being used, but let's just assume that we're here to try to find what would be the impact on efficiency, what changes are there to consumer and producer surplus in light of a maximum price. Now, I am going to use $30 as the maximum or price ceiling price, and I'm going to show that by drawing a line, a horizontal line that cuts across both the supply and demand curves. So here is our price ceiling at $30. Now this is in a market that we've already seen has a equilibrium price at $45 and an equilibrium quantity of 300. So what is going to happen is that the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are no longer going to equal each other. The price of $45 is the only price where that is true. At every price below the equilibrium price, the quantity supplied, which I'll just call QS, is represented by the quantity at $30 on our supply curve, and the quantity demanded, QD, is the quantity associated with the demand curve at $30. I think it's clear quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied at $30. We would call that a shortage, in this case because it's caused by a government-imposed price ceiling. It's an artificially created shortage. Consumers or buyers want to buy more units of this good. In fact, it looks like 400 units. But the quantity available that sellers or producers are willing to sell is less than 200. So the effect or impact of this is reflected in fewer transactions happening. Quantity supplied, because it is smaller than the quantity demanded, is the limiting factor. And so the first kind of step to graphically show what's happening is to go at $30 to our supply curve where I've already labeled QS. And now I want to draw a vertical line straight up to the demand curve at QS. This is created what we generally know as the wedge, a wedge. In effect, this ceiling price has driven a wedge between the demand and supply curves. All of that area to the right of the wedge, let me change my marker here, is going to be this triangular area down to our equilibrium, the intersection between supply and demand. That area represents the lost benefits that occur when we limit the market to this price of $30. At $45, we had 300 beneficial transactions or units exchanged. At $30, we're going to have something less than 200 units exchanged. let's say it's 175. So, 175 is a lot fewer beneficial transactions than 300 units. Since those units are not exchanged, any consumer and producer surpluses are lost. And that loss is reflected in our area of deadweight loss. Now you remember that the consumer surplus is our area below the demand curve down to the price that consumers pay. Well, consumers are no longer paying $45, they're paying $30, right? So if I use the letter CS to represent consumer surplus, our new area of consumer surplus is going to be all of this area. It's no longer shaped like a triangle, but it's showing that some consumers now have gained in the sense that they're paying less than $45, paying only $30. But then other consumers, were hurt by this. Those consumers who were able to buy and sell when we had 300 units exchanged, but now aren't able to exchange because at $30, sellers are only willing to sell 175. Now the area of producer surplus is the area above the supply curve up to the price that those consumers are paying. So PS is this area that I'm shading in now. And if you look back to the previous video on consumer and producer surplus, you would notice that this area of producer surplus is much smaller than it would have been. And actually I could show, if we were up here at $45, we would have been coloring all of this area in here as part of producer surplus, where those little green dots are. But now either that producer surplus has been transferred into the hands of consumers or has been forfeited because only 175 units are exchanged rather than 300. In other words, part of that deadweight loss. Since total surplus is the sum of consumer and producer surplus, you can see that consumer and producer surplus are not maximized. They have both been reduced via this area of deadweight loss to some amount less than where it would have been had this market been free of any intervention. And so there is the inefficiency. A loss in the number of transactions from 300 down to 175, and the associated consumer and producer surpluses associated with those transactions. Since those are gone, we may have improved the outcome for some of these consumers, but it came at the expense of not everyone being able to buy and sell as they had at 45, and the forfeit of any of the consumer producer surpluses that existed when the market equilibrium price was at $45. Okay, that's it.